Have you ever wondered what's really in a name? Take the name Russian. It conjures 1,000 images. The gilded domes of Moscow, the brutal cold of Siberia, the fierce warriors of Kievan Rus. For centuries, that we've been told a simple story, that the Russians are a great Slavic people, a monolithic nation forged in the forests of Eastern Europe, direct descendants of the warriors who founded the first Rus state. It's a powerful story, a story of unity and of a single origin. But what if that story is a lie? Welcome to DNA Detective, the show where we solve history's greatest mysteries using the ultimate clue, the human genome. Today, we're opening a cold case that's over 1,000 years old. The case of the Russian people. Everyone believes the Russians are a single, unified Slavic nation. But their DNA tells a completely different story. It reveals a secret that historians missed, a ghost in their genome. It proves that the Russian people are not one ancient group, but the product of a massive, forgotten fusion between two completely different peoples. One, the Slavic farmers we know, the other, a mysterious ghost population from the forests of the far north, and with roots stretching deep into Siberia. This is the story of a hidden ancestry, an ancient pact written not in chronicles, but in blood. This is the proof that shatters the myth of the pure Russian. So, who are the real ancestors of the Russian people? The history books say one thing. Their blood says another. Today, we follow the evidence. To crack this case, we first need to understand the official story, the historical alibi. Who are the Russians supposed to be? The story begins around the 6th century AD. Slavic tribes began a massive expansion out of a homeland somewhere in Eastern Europe. One group, the East Slavs, migrated into what is now Western Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. They were farmers, traders, and fierce warriors. By the 9th century, these tribes had formed a powerful state, Kievan Rus. According to the ancient chronicles, they invited Viking chieftains, known as the Varangians, to rule over them. The legendary leader, Rurik, and his dynasty established a kingdom that became the cradle of 3 modern nations, the Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians. This is the foundation myth. The story of a Slavic heartland ruled by Viking princes that grew into the mighty Russian Empire. It's neat, it's simple, and it seems to explain everything. But there's a problem, a huge one, and it's right there, in the DNA of every second Russian man. In genetics, we have a powerful tool for tracing paternal ancestry. It's called the Y chromosome. That's passed down directly from father to son, generation after generation, like a family surname. Specific variations, called haplogroups, act like genetic clans, allowing us to trace the deep ancestral journeys of our forefathers. Now, if the traditional story is true, that Russians are primarily the descendants of East Slavic tribes, we would expect their Y DNA to look very similar to that of other Slavs, like Poles and Belarusians. And for many Russians, then it does. So nearly half of all Russian men belong to haplogroup R1A. This marker is incredibly common across all Slavic-speaking populations. It's often called the Slavic gene, though its story is much older, tied to the great migrations of horse-riding warriors from the Eurasian steppe thousands of years ago. This part of the evidence fits the alibi perfectly. Southern and Central Russians show high frequencies of R1A, linking them closely to their Slavic neighbors. But this is where the investigation takes a shocking turn, because when geneticists looked closer, that they found another major haplogroup, a second genetic signature, present in staggering numbers. Especially in the north. Well, get this. Over 20% of Russian men, on average, belong to a completely different genetic clan, haplogroup N, specifically a branch called N1C. And in northern Russia, that number skyrockets to over 35%, even 40% in some areas. So, what's the big deal? The big deal is where haplogroup N1C comes from. It's not typically Slavic. Its origins do not lie on the plains of Eastern Europe. Haplogroup N is believed to have originated in East Asia or Southeast Asia some 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. Its branch, N1C, the one we find in Russia, likely arose in southern Siberia around 10,000 years ago. This is the genetic signature of Siberian tribes, of Uralic-speaking peoples like the Finns, the Estonians, and the Sami of Lapland. In fact, N1C reaches its highest frequencies in Europe among the Finns, that where over 60% of men carry it, that it's sitting right in the middle of the Russian genome. This is not a trace amount. It is not a few percentage points of admixture. It's a foundational pillar of the Russian paternal bloodline. This is our genetic bomb. A Siberian ghost is haunting the Russian genome. The history books tell a story of Slavic pioneers moving north and east and settling an empty wilderness, but the DNA tells a story of collision and of a meeting between two different worlds. So the central question of our investigation is this: who were these people of haplogroup N1C, and how did their Siberian-born DNA become so fundamentally Russian? To solve this, we need to look at the paternal lines first. Our genetic clue, number 1. The Y DNA is the smoking gun in this case. Let's look at the map of Russia again. When geneticists plotted the distribution of R1A and N1C, and they saw something incredible. A clear genetic border runs right through the country. It's called a north-south cline. In the south, around the historical heartland of Kievan Rus, R1A dominates. This is the Slavic signal, loud and clear. But as you move north into the ancient lands of Novgorod, Pskov, and Vologda, R1A frequency drops, and N1C rises dramatically. What does this crime scene tell us? It tells us that the Slavic expansion from the south did not move into an empty land. They encountered a vast, pre-existing population, a network of tribes who had lived in these northern forests for thousands of years. These were the Finno-Ugric peoples. The history books mention them, but often as a footnote, as primitive tribes that were simply absorbed or civilized by the incoming Slavs. But the DNA evidence refutes that narrative completely. This was not a simple replacement. The high frequency of N1C shows that these native northern men did not just vanish. They stayed. They became fathers, and their sons became Russians. This means that the ethnogenesis of the Russian people, the very process of their creation, was a story of fusion. A merger between the southern Slavic newcomers, R1A, and the northern Finno-Ugric natives, N1C. The northern Russians, in particular, are a perfect hybrid of these two ancient worlds. Their DNA links them as closely to Finns and Balts as it does to southern Slavs. But wait, the plot thickens. Remember Rurik, the Viking founder of Russia? For decades, the historians debated his origins. Was he Swedish? Danish? A myth? Modern DNA testing of his living descendants and, incredibly, the ancient remains of Rurikid princes has thrown another twist into our story. You might expect the Viking ruler of the Slavs to carry a typically Scandinavian haplogroup, like I1 or R1b. He did not. Rurik and his dynasty belonged to haplogroup N1C. That's right. The legendary Varangian chieftain who founded Russia carried the very same Siberian marker as the Finno-Ugric tribes of the north. This stunning discovery suggests that the Vikings who came to rule Russia were not pure Scandinavians either. They likely came from coastal areas of Sweden or Finland, where there was significant mixing between Norse and Finno-Ugric peoples. The founders of Russia were themselves a product of the same genetic fusion they would later preside over. So the father lines of Russia tell a radical new story, one of a dual ancestry, where Siberian hunter-gatherers and European farmers met and merged to create something entirely new. But what about the mothers? This is where we turn to genetic clue number 2, the maternal lines traced through mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA. mtDNA is passed from a mother to all her children, but only her daughters pass it on. It gives us a picture of the female side of the story, and in the Russian case, it's just as revealing. When scientists analyzed the mtDNA of Russians from across the country, then they found something remarkable. Unlike the Y-DNA, which showed that dramatic north-south split, the maternal lines were far more uniform, and they were overwhelmingly European. Over 95% of Russian mtDNA belongs to common West Eurasian haplogroups like H, U, and J. There is very little trace of East Asian maternal lineages. So, what does this all mean? We have paternal lines coming from both Eastern Europe, R1a, and Siberia, N1c. But the maternal lines are almost entirely European. This pattern paints a clear picture of what happened during the Slavic expansion into the north. The incoming Slavic men, carrying R1a, did not just conquer and replace the local Finno-Ugric men, carrying N1c. The evidence suggests a complex process of assimilation, and a key part of that was marriage. Slavic men took local Finno-Ugric women as wives. And over generations, the Finno-Ugric men also integrated into the new Slavic-dominated society, marrying women from within this blended population. Their language and some of their culture faded, replaced by Slavic language and the Orthodox Christian religion. But their genetic legacy, their paternal signature, N1c, survived, passed down from father to son in an unbroken chain to the present day. The mothers were the bridge between these two worlds. They were the key to the fusion. This genetic data is the silent testimony of millions of women who, through their families, wove together the DNA of Siberia and Europe to create the Russian people. We've followed the genetic breadcrumbs, and we've seen how the father lines reveal a hidden northern ancestor, and the mother lines reveal the story of how these two peoples merged. Now, let's synthesize the evidence. How does this genetic secret explain the unique character of Russia? This is not just a story about genes. It's a story about culture. The Finno-Ugric substrate, that ghost population, did not just leave its DNA. It left echoes in the Russian language, in its folklore, and in its soul. Linguists have pointed out features in northern Russian dialects that are unusual for Slavic languages, but are common in Finno-Ugric languages. Even some core Russian words related to the northern landscape, like tundra, have Uralic roots. Think about Russian folk tales. They are filled with spirits of the forest, the water, and the household. Figures like the Leshy or the Domovoi, these beliefs in a world animated by nature spirits, are far more characteristic of ancient Finno-Ugric shamanism than mainstream Slavic paganism. They are cultural survivors, echoes of the worldview of Russia's forgotten ancestors. This dual ancestry also helps explain a fundamental aspect of Russian history, its relationship with its vast, forbidding northern and eastern territory. The Russians who expanded across Siberia to the Pacific were not just Slavs from the European plain. They were, in part, descendants of a people born of the northern forests. They carried a genetic and cultural memory adapted to these harsh environments. The assimilation of the Finno-Ugric peoples was the first step in Russia's epic eastward expansion. It gave the Russian nation a unique Eurasian character, as a bridge between the worlds of Europe and Asia. So, let's return to the crime scene. We have the historical alibi. the story of a pure Slavic nation. And we have the DNA evidence, the shocking presence of a massive Finno-Ugric and Siberian paternal line. What is the verdict? The verdict is that the myth of a monolithic Russian people is just that, a myth. The Russian genome is not a simple story of Slavic purity. It is a breathtaking saga of fusion. The unique Russian identity was forged in the crucible of the northern forests, and from the genetic and cultural marriage of two ancient peoples. The Slavic farmers who brought the language of Pushkin and the faith of orthodoxy, and the Finno-Ugric forest dwellers who contributed a deep, ancient connection to the vast wilderness of northern Eurasia. This hidden ancestry does not make Russians any less Slavic. It makes them something more. It makes them a unique bridge people, whose DNA holds the memory of both the European steppe and the Siberian taiga. The ghost in their genome is not a foreign element. It is half of their soul. In the end, DNA is the most honest chronicle we have. It does not care about politics or national myths. It simply tells the story of who our ancestors were and where they came from. The story of the Russians is a powerful reminder that no nation is a monolith. We are all mosaics, patchworks of ancient journeys, forgotten migrations, and unexpected kinship. The history of humanity is not a story of pure bloodlines, but a grand, messy, and beautiful story of mixing and merging. The truth of who we are is written in our cells, waiting for us to read it. What's the most surprising secret you've discovered about your own ancestry? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to solve more of history's greatest mysteries, do not forget to subscribe to DNA Detective and ring that bell. Let's find out what history is written in you.